My name is Ethan Brooks, and I was just 8 years old in the summer of 1995 when I lived in a crumbling little house on the edge of an Indiana town nobody cared about. I'm the kind of kid who poked at shadows, chased questions adults ignored, always itching to know what's behind the next door or under the next rock. My little brother Tommy was 6, quiet and clingy, his big eyes following me like I was his whole world, and our parents, Dad a grease-stained mechanic, Mom a nervous wreck, kept us in line in that sagging box of peeling paint we called home. It sat near a wild field, swallowed by silence, but what I can't forget is the crawl space under it. A black, stinking pit sealed with crooked slats, a place I was told to never touch. That was until the man down there started whispering my name, and 3 months later, I stood in Tommy's room, my sneakers soaked in his blood, staring at what was left of him. His body torn open, guts spilling across the floor, walls streaked red, his tiny hands clawing at nothing. One red shoe gone, the same shoe I'd seen days before in the dark beneath our house where the man told me it'd be. It was late that night, the air heavy with summer heat, when Dad broke the crawl space open, his flashlight shaking in his hand, the beam slicing through the black to find that shoe, Tommy's shoe, half buried in the dirt, stained dark with something thick and wet. My stomach dropped, my legs wobbling as Dad's voice cracked. "Where's Tommy?" Mom screamed from the porch, a raw, jagged sound, and then it came, a wail from inside, high and broken, not human, ripping out of Tommy's room like a knife through my skull. I ran, my heart pounding, my breath short, following Dad as he smashed through the door, wood splintering under his shoulder. The room was a slaughterhouse, blood everywhere, splattered up the walls in violent arcs, pooling warm and sticky on the floor. The ceiling fan flickering, casting shadows that twisted like fingers. Tommy, or what used to be him, lay in the center, chest ripped wide, ribs cracked open, his face frozen in a scream, eyes gone, just black holes weeping red. Claw marks gouged the floor, deep and jagged, and his other shoe sat by the shuttered window, rocking slow in the breeze. I didn't scream. Couldn't. My throat locked tight, guilt crashing over me like a wave, knowing I'd let that man in, knowing I'd killed my brother with every word I'd whispered through those slats. It started back in June when we moved into that house. A tired heap of wood and nails Dad swore he'd fix up someday. The porch sagged, the paint flaked, and the field out back stretched wild and empty. But I loved it. Loved the space, the quiet, the way it felt like ours. Tommy stuck close, trailing me with his toy cars, while Dad worked late at the garage and Mom hovered, her voice sharp with worry. "Stay away from that crawl space, Ethan," Dad'd grunt, wiping grease off his hands. "Full of spiders and junk that'll cut you." Mom'd nod, exasperated. "Listen to your father, please." It was under the house, a hollow gap barely 2 feet high, sealed with warped wooden slats, stinking of damp earth and something sour I couldn't place. I'd kneel by it sometimes, peering through the gaps, my nose wrinkling at the rot smell, catching glimpses of dirt and beams, maybe a skitter of bugs. I never touched it until that afternoon in late July when the whisper came. I was alone in the backyard, kicking my soccer ball against the shed, the sun low and orange, sweat sticking my shirt to my back. Then I heard it, faint, dry, slipping out from under the house like a breeze with teeth. "Ethan," I stopped, the ball rolling dead, my heart thumping as I turned to the crawl space. The slats stared back, black and still, and it came again, louder. "Come here, Ethan." My chest tightened, a shiver crawling up my arms, but I wasn't scared. Not yet. Just curious, that dumb kid kinda curious that makes you think nothing can hurt you. I dropped to my knees, dirt grinding into my skin, and pressed my face to the gaps, squinting into the dark. A face stared back, pale, thin, eyes wide and unblinking, sunken deep in a skull streaked with grime. His hair hung long and greasy, clinging to his cheeks, and his lips cracked into a smile, voice soft, warm. "Didn't mean to scare you, buddy. I'm an old friend of your dad's." I froze, my breath shallow, hands gripping the slats, but his calm wrapped around me, soothing the flutter in my gut. "Really?" I whispered, my voice small, excitement bubbling up. He shifted, bony shoulders scraping the dirt, his shirt torn, skin raw with oozing sores, wet and glistening in the faint light. "Yeah, used to be real close to the family," he said, nodding slow, his eyes sharp, locked on mine. "Been a while, he might not remember me. Hey, don't tell him I'm here yet, okay? Our little secret." His smile stretched, teeth yellow and jagged, a low hum buzzing from his throat, and I grinned back, my chest swelling with something new. Pride, maybe, or power. "Sure," I said, my voice steady now, and he nodded pleased, his unblinking stare burning into me like a promise. I couldn't stay away after that. Every day, I'd sneak out after lunch, kneel by the crawl space, whispering through the gaps while he lay in the dirt, his voice curling out, soft and patient. "What's your favorite game, Ethan?" he'd ask, and I'd beam. "Soccer. I'm gonna be a pro." He'd hum, low and warm. "That's good, real good." It felt safe, like talking to a shadow that cared, better than Dad's grunts or Mom's nagging. But the questions changed. Slow, sneaky. "Your dad still works late? Where's your room? Mom lock the doors at night?" I didn't think, just answered, eager to please. "Yeah, she locks them, but sometimes she forgets. Dad gets mad." He'd go quiet, too long, then murmur, "Really? Forgets, huh?" His voice tighter, a hunger I didn't catch, my trust blind and thick. The crawl space turned wrong. The rot smell grew, sharp, wet, like meat gone bad, wafting up through the slats, making my eyes water. I'd hear scratching, quick and faint, like claws on wood, or a hum, low and buzzing, vibrating in my teeth. One day I saw it. Tommy's red shoe, the one he'd lost weeks back, half buried in the dirt, stained dark, wet with something thick. My stomach twisted, my breath catching, but the man's voice slid out, calm, smooth. "Don't worry about that, buddy. Just junk down here." I swallowed hard, nodding, the unease fading under his words, my fingers trembling against the wood. Another time I caught a glint. Something small, white, a bone maybe, jutting from the dirt, but he hummed louder, drowning my thoughts, and I let it go, my trust a rope he kept pulling. Tommy caught me a week later. I was whispering, "We went to Grandma's yesterday," when the screen door creaked. "What are you doing?" His voice piped up, high and sharp, his small hands gripping the porch rail. I flinched, scraping my knee bloody as I jerked back, panic spiking hot in my chest. "Nothing," I snapped, scrambling up, brushing dirt off my shorts, my heart racing. His eyes narrowed, suspicious, and he stepped closer, craning his neck toward the crawl space. "Looking for what?" The man's breath went shallow, waiting, his silence heavy. "My ball." I lied, my voice shaking. "It rolled under." Tommy frowned, his big eyes searching mine, but he shrugged. "Wanna play in the treehouse?" I nodded fast, relief flooding me as he turned away, the man's presence sinking back into the dark, a weight I couldn't shake. He asked for something the next day, his voice soft, casual. "Hey buddy, can you do me a favor?" I nodded, eager, my trust a reflex now. "Your dad keeps a spare key to the shed, right? Could you grab it?" My gut twinged, a flicker of something cold, wrong, but I pushed it down. "Yeah, under the porch blocks," I said, hesitating, my fingers fidgeting. "Why?" He laughed, light, easy. "Left something in there ages ago, a keepsake, nothing big." It made sense. Dad had old junk too, tools he'd never fix. I almost ran for it, but he stopped me, voice low. "It's okay, Ethan. You don't have to. Just thinking out loud." I grinned, relieved, the unease slipping away, but it lingered, a splinter I couldn't pull. 2 days later he went further, his voice a whisper, tight and urgent. "Could you leave the back door unlocked tonight? Wanna leave you a present." My heart jumped. Presents were rare. My birthday months gone, and I nodded, whispering, "Okay?" My hands sweaty with excitement. Dinner came, Mom calling us in, and I slipped to the back door, clicking the lock open, my pulse buzzing, a grin tugging at my lips. We ate. Chicken, tough and dry, the room warm, when I blurted it, casual, dumb. "I talked to your friend today." Dad's fork froze, knuckles white, Mom dropping her pan with a crash that echoed in my ears. "What friend?" Dad's voice was slow, sharp, his eyes pinning me, cold and hard. "The one in the crawl space," I said, confused, the air turning to ice. Mom gasped, her hand trembling, and Dad bolted up, chair screeching, storming outside, his face white with something I didn't understand. Fear maybe, or rage. I stood there in the backyard, my sneakers sinking into the damp earth, watching Dad tear at the crawl space slats, his hands shaking with a fury I'd never seen. The air was thick, humid, the rot smell rolling out stronger now, sharp and sour, clawing at my throat. My heart pounded, a frantic thud against my ribs, my scraped knee stinging as I shifted, too scared to move closer but too frozen to run. Mom's voice cracked behind me, high and trembling. "Mark, what's happening?" But he didn't answer, just ripped the wood apart, nails shrieking, splinters flying, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The flashlight on his belt flicked on, the beam slicing through the black, and I held my breath, expecting to see him. The man, his pale face, those wide, unblinking eyes. But it was empty. Just dirt and cobwebs, the sour stink wafting up like a slap. Then the light caught it. Tommy's red shoe, half buried, stained dark with something wet, thick, glistening. My stomach twisted, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck, my legs wobbling as Dad's voice broke, hoarse and raw. What the hell? Where's Tommy? Mom screamed, a jagged wail that cut through the night, her hands clutching the porch rail, eyes wide with panic. Who's in there? She shouted, stepping forward, her voice shaking. And then it came. A sound from inside, high and piercing. Not a cry, not a scream. Something broken, something wrong, tearing out of Tommy's room like a blade through my chest. My head spun, my breath short, terror flooding me as Dad dropped the flashlight and bolted for the house, his boots pounding the porch steps. I ran after him, my legs moving on their own, my heart slamming, my mind blank but screaming one word: Tommy. Mom's shouts faded behind me, a dull buzz in my ears as I stumbled inside, the air turning cold, heavy with that rot smell now seeping through the walls. Dad hit Tommy's door like a truck, his shoulder crashing into it, wood buckling with a groan that echoed in the tight hall. I was right behind, my hands trembling, my breath hitching, and when it gave, splintering open with a crack, he stumbled in, catching himself on the frame. The room was dark, the ceiling fan flickering, casting shadows that twisted and danced, and then I saw it. Blood everywhere, a sea of it, splattered up the walls in thick red streaks, pooling warm and sticky on the floor, dripping slow from the fan blades. Tommy lay in the middle, or what was left of him, his chest torn wide, ribs snapped like twigs, guts spilling out in wet, glistening ropes, his face locked in a scream, eyes gone, just black holes weeping red. His tiny hands clawed at the air, frozen mid-grasp. Claw marks gouged the floor, deep and jagged, trailing to the shattered window where his other red shoe rocked in the breeze, blood dripping from its laces, pooling beneath in a dark, congealing mess. I didn't scream, couldn't. My throat locked tight, my knees buckling as guilt crashed over me like a tide, hot and suffocating, a weight that crushed my chest and burned my eyes with tears I couldn't shed. I'd done this, I'd let him in, fed him every secret, every key, and now Tommy was gone, torn apart because of me. The air stank, copper and rot, thick and choking, mixing with the sour dampness that always clung to the house. Dad dropped to his knees beside Tommy, his hands hovering over the mess of flesh and bone, trembling, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts that sounded more like sobs. No, no, God, no. He choked, his voice breaking, fingers curling into fists as blood soaked his jeans, staining them dark. Mom shoved past me, her scream shattering into a wail that pierced my ears, raw and animal, her body collapsing next to Dad, her hands clawing at the floor, smearing red across her palms as she reached for Tommy, pulling at his torn shirt like she could piece him back together. My baby, she moaned, her voice a broken loop, her eyes wild, darting from his ruined face to the claw marks, then to me, sharp, accusing, cutting through the haze of my shock. Ethan, what did you do? She hissed, her words a knife, twisting deep, and I flinched, my hands shaking, black smudges on my fingers catching the flickering light, wet, sticky like the dirt I'd touched under the crawl space. I opened my mouth but nothing came out, just a whimper, small and pitiful, my chest tight with panic and shame. Dad surged up, grabbing me by the shoulders, his grip hard enough to bruise, shaking me so my teeth rattled. Who was he, Ethan? Who'd you talk to? His voice roared, hot and furious, his face twisted, eyes red and wet, staring at me like I wasn't his son anymore, like I was something else, something guilty, something wrong. I don't know, I stammered, my voice cracking, tears spilling now, hot and fast down my cheeks. He said he was your friend, Dad. I didn't. My words choked off as he shoved me back, my spine hitting the wall, the plaster cold and damp against my shirt. Friend? He spat, his hands balling into fists, his breath heaving. I don't have friends who do this. The room spun, shadows stretching long and thin under the fan's stuttering light. The blood smell gagging me, my stomach lurching as I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. Mom's sobs turned to a low keening, her hands cradling Tommy's head, what was left of it, blood matting his hair, dripping through her fingers, staining her dress in dark, wet patches. I wanted to run, to hide, to claw the guilt out of my chest, but I couldn't move, just sat there, trembling, my hands clutching my knees, the black smudges spreading, itching under my nails like they were alive. Then I heard it, a low hum, faint but growing, buzzing up through the floorboards, vibrating in my bones, the same hum I'd heard from the crawl space. My head snapped up, my breath shallow, eyes darting to the window where Tommy's shoe rocked, the breeze carrying a whisper. Ethan, soft, dry, curling through the glass like a finger brushing my ear. Dad heard it too, his head jerked toward the window, his face paling, his hands dropping limp at his sides. What the hell was that? He muttered, his voice shaking, stepping over Tommy's body, blood squelching under his boots as he grabbed a hammer from the dresser, gripping it tight. Mom's head lifted, her eyes wild, darting between us, her voice a hiss. "Mark, something's still here." She scrambled up, slipping in the blood, her hands leaving red prints on the wall as she backed toward me, her breath ragged, terror mixing with her grief. I pressed against the wall, my heart hammering, the hum louder now, pulsing in my skull, and then a knock, sharp, deliberate, thudded from under the floor, right beneath us, shaking the boards. Dad froze, hammer raised, his eyes wide, and I whimpered, "He's down there." My voice small, trembling, guilt choking me as the knock came again, thud, thud, slow like a heartbeat. The door creaked behind us and I turned, my stomach dropping. Mrs. Clara Hensley stood there, her grey hair wild, her cane tapping the bloody floor, her sunken eyes glinting in the dim light. She lived 2 houses down, always muttering about ghosts and curses, and now she stared at us, her lips curling into a thin, knowing smile. "Told you, boy," she rasped, her voice dry as dust, stepping closer, her shadow stretching long and twisted. "The faceless one, he don't leave, not once he's tasted you." Dad spun on her, hammer raised, his voice a growl. "Get out, Clara, now's not the time." But she didn't flinch, just pointed her cane at the crawl space outside, her eyes locking on mine. "You fed him, Ethan. Gave him your brother's name, didn't you? He keeps their shoes, marks his kills. Took my nephew in 72, left his sneaker under my porch, still wet with blood." My chest tightened, my breath hitching, her words sinking in like claws. I told him about Tommy, casual, stupid. "Yeah, he always comes with us." I'd laughed, never thinking, and now Clara's stare burned through me, cold and certain. "He's not a man," she whispered, leaning close, her breath sour with decay. "Wears faces till they rot. Lives down there, waiting." Dad grabbed her arm, shoving her back, his voice shaking. "Enough, you're scaring him." But she laughed, a crackling sound that echoed in the room, her eyes glinting. "Scared? He should be, he's next." My knees buckled, my hands trembling, the hum growing louder, the floor vibrating under me, and I saw it. Black ooze seeping up through the cracks, thick and stinking, pooling around Tommy's body, tendrils curling like fingers. Dad dropped the hammer, his hands shaking, turning to me, his face pale, his voice low. "What did he say, Ethan? Tell me everything." I swallowed, my throat dry, my voice trembling as I spilled it. "He asked where we sleep, if Mom locks the doors, said he'd leave me a present." Dad's eyes widened, his breath hitching, and Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, blood smearing her face. "You unlocked the door?" she whispered, her voice breaking, stepping back, her eyes darting to the window where the shoe rocked, the breeze carrying that whisper again. "Ethan." Soft, insistent, closer now. Dad grabbed me, pulling me up, his grip tight, his voice sharp. "Stay here. Don't move." He snatched the hammer and stormed out, Mom following, her sobs trailing behind, leaving me alone with Tommy's body, the hum buzzing in my ears, the ooze spreading, lapping at my sneakers. I heard boots outside. Dad's, then others. Officer Daniel Pike's voice cutting through the night, gruff and steady. "Mark, what's going on?" Pike was big, broad-shouldered, his badge glinting as he stepped into the yard, flashlight sweeping the crawl space. I crept to the window, my hands trembling, peering out as Dad pointed, his voice shaking. "He was under there," Ethan said. "Look at the shoe." Pike knelt, his beam catching the red sneaker, then something else. A rusted knife, crusted with dark blood, half buried in the dirt. "No footprints," Pike muttered, his voice low, "but drag marks, wet, fresh, like something crawled out." My stomach lurched, my breath shallow, the hum louder now, vibrating up my legs, and I saw it. A shadow in the field, tall and thin, swaying slow, no face, just a smear where eyes should be, Tommy's other shoe dangling from its hand. Pike stood, his face grim, turning to Dad. "Get Ethan, we need to know what he saw." Dad nodded, his jaw tight, and stormed back in, his boots leaving bloody prints, his eyes burning as he grabbed me, dragging me outside. "Tell him," he barked, shoving me toward Pike, his hand tight on my shoulder. I stammered, my voice trembling, tears streaming. Pale, skinny, big eyes, didn't blink. "Said he knew you, Dad. Asked about Tommy, the doors." Pike's pen scratched fast, his eyes narrowing, his voice low. "Sore is? Like he was sick?" I nodded, my chest tight, guilt choking me, and Pike glanced at Dad, his face hard. "Sounds like a drifter. Or worse, we'll sweep the field, but he's gone now." My head spun, my knees weak, the hum pulsing, the shadow in the field swaying closer, whispering, "Ethan," soft, dry, a promise I couldn't unhear. My hands shook, the black smudges on my fingers itching like they were crawling under my skin, and I wiped them on my shorts, smearing dark streaks. My breath hitching as Dad's grip tightened, his nails digging into my shoulder, his silence louder than any scream. Pike waved over two other cops, their flashlights cutting through the dark, beams bouncing off the trees as they fanned out toward the field. "Check the perimeter. Look for tracks," he ordered. His voice steady but sharp, his boots crunching gravel as he turned back to Dad. "You stay with him, Mark. We'll figure this out." Dad didn't answer, just stared at me, his eyes red, hollow, like he was seeing through me, past me, to something I couldn't name. Mom stumbled out, her dress soaked red, her hands trembling as she clutched a dish towel, blood dripping from it onto the porch steps. "He's gone, Mark. Our boy's gone," she sobbed, her voice breaking, her eyes darting to me, sharp and cold, cutting deeper than any knife. "Why'd you do it, Ethan? Why'd you let him in?" I shrank back, my throat closing, my chest burning with shame, tears blurring my vision as I choked out, "I didn't know. I thought he said." Mrs. Clara Hensley shuffled closer, her cane tapping slow, her shadow stretching long and twisted under the porch light, her voice a rasp cutting through Mom's sobs. "Told you, boy. The faceless one don't let go," she hissed, her eyes glinting, wild and knowing. Leaning in so close, I smelled the decay on her breath, sour and thick like the crawl space. "Fed him your brother's blood, didn't you? Gave him his name, his place, now he's got a taste for you." Dad shoved her back, his voice a growl. "Shut up, Clara! Get out!" But she laughed, dry and crackling, her cane pointing at me, trembling. "You'll hear him, Ethan, under your floor, in your dreams. He don't sleep, don't die, just waits." My stomach lurched, my legs trembling, the hum buzzing louder now, vibrating up through the ground, and I saw it again, the shadow in the field, taller, thinner, swaying slow, Tommy's shoe swinging from its hand, blood dripping into the grass. Pike's radio crackled, a voice cutting through, sharp and urgent. "Dan, we got something. Drag marks, wet, heading into the trees. No footprints, but shit, there's blood here, fresh." Pike's face hardened, his hand dropping to his gun, his eyes flicking to Dad. "Stay here, keep him inside." He jogged off, flashlight bouncing, disappearing into the dark, and Dad dragged me back in, his grip bruising, shoving me into the living room, the air thick with blood and rot, the hum pulsing through the floorboards, louder, insistent. Mom followed, her sobs turning to a low moan, her hands clawing at her hair, leaving red streaks across her face. "You killed him, Ethan?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes locked on me, hate burning through her tears. "My baby's gone because of you." I sank to the couch, my hands trembling, black ooze seeping from my fingers now, dripping onto the cushions, burning my skin, my chest tight with a scream I couldn't let out. The lights flickered, buzzing with that high-pitched whine, and then a thud, sharp, heavy, shook the floor beneath us, dust falling from the ceiling, the hum turning to a low growl, rumbling deep in my bones. Dad spun, hammer in hand, his voice shaking. "What the hell's that?" Mom gasped, backing into the wall, her hands slipping in Tommy's blood, smearing it across the plaster as she stared at the floor, wide-eyed. "He's still here," she whispered, her voice breaking, and I felt it. Something moving under us, scratching, clawing, the boards creaking slow, deliberate, like it was pacing, waiting. I clutched my knees, my breath shallow, tears streaming, the growl growing, the room trembling, and then a voice, not a whisper, a rasp, slid up through the cracks. "Ethan, you promised." My heart stopped, my eyes darting to Dad, his face paling, hammer raised, his breath hitching as he stared at the floor, the black ooze bubbling up, tendrils curling toward me, cold and wet. Dad swung the hammer, crack, smashing the floor, wood splintering, black ooze spraying, his voice a roar. "Stay away from my son!" The growl turned to a laugh, low, guttural, echoing from everywhere, the walls shaking, the lights flickering out, plunging us into dark. Mom screamed, scrambling to me, her hands slick with blood, pulling me close, her breath hot on my neck, her voice a sob. "Ethan, what did you do?" The lights snapped back, dim and buzzing, and I saw it, a crack in the floor, wide and jagged, black ooze pouring out, pooling around us, tendrils wriggling, reaching, brushing my legs, burning through my shorts. Dad swung again, smashing the tendrils, his hands trembling, black blood splattering his face, his voice breaking. "Get out! Get him out!" We ran, Mom dragging me, Dad behind, his hammer clattering as we stumbled onto the porch, the night cold and thick, the field alive with shadows, swaying, whispering, "Ethan, Ethan." Soft, dry, a chorus now, curling through the dark. Pike and his men shouted from the trees, flashlights flashing, their voices sharp, panicked. "Something's moving, Dan, get back!" A gunshot cracked, then another, screams cutting through, fading fast, and I knew they'd found him or he'd found them. Dad shoved us toward the truck, his hands shaking, keys fumbling, his voice raw. "We're leaving. Now!" Mom clung to me, her sobs shaking her body, her hands leaving bloody prints on my shirt, her eyes darting to the house, wide and terrified as the hum followed, buzzing under my feet, in my skull. We moved 2 weeks later, a small house miles away, bare and cold, the air thick with silence. Mom wouldn't speak, her eyes avoiding mine, Dad's voice gone, his hands always clenched, his gaze distant, broken. I'd lie awake, the hum starting again, faint at first, buzzing under the new floorboards, growing louder each night. Ethan, soft, dry, a promise I couldn't escape. One night, I woke to scratching, sharp and quick, under my bed, my breath shallow, my hands trembling as I peeked over the edge. Black ooze seeping up, tendrils curling, and outside a shadow, tall, thin, no face, Tommy's shoe dangling, blood dripping onto the glass. My fingers shook, tracing the floor, finding a scrap of paper tucked under my pillow. Torn, damp, scribbled with "Don't sleep" in jagged red, the ink smearing like blood under my touch. I got out. Me, Ethan, the kid who thought secrets were games, who thought whispers couldn't kill. Tommy's gone, my family's gone, but I survived, carrying this weight, this hum that never stops. A life where every shadow might be him, the faceless one, the thing I fed, the thing I let in. He's out there still, under the dirt, in the dark, waiting, his hunger sharp, his whispers endless, and every night I fight to keep my eyes open, knowing he's suffering too, trapped, voiceless, clawing for me, never resting, never free. I learned, don't trust what hides, don't give it your name, because once it knows you, it owns you. If you're hearing this, tell me, what would you do? Lock the door when the dark calls, run when the floor hums, or listen just once and see what's waiting? Drop it below. I need to know I'm not alone, because he's still here, under my floor, and I don't know how long I can fight him.